The engines remained silent. The street lay hushed, almost eerily so, with the afternoon sun suspended high and wan in the heavens. A young boy stood at the curb's edge, shaking as though the entire world had turned frigid, even beneath the glaring light. His gray sweatshirt appeared one size too large, his denim pants worn and dirty, and his fists tightened at his hips. Before him crouched a man, his broad arms covered in tattoos and scars that chronicled tales of highways and conflicts. His leather vest displayed the Hell's Angels insignia, badges sewn firmly and weathered with honor. His name was Ryder Hail, and at his back stood 5 of his brothers, men forged of steel and determination, each one motionless, observing the boy as though they'd just witnessed a specter. The boy gazed up at him with eyes brimming with tears, his voice scarcely more than a murmur. "They took my sister," he uttered, the words fracturing midway through his exhalation. And in that moment, the hushed street no longer seemed secure. It felt like the genesis of something relentless. If you believe in compassion, fresh starts, and the strength of defending what's just, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Untold Stories 0.4. These are the narratives that remind us even the most hardened souls can possess the greatest hearts. Ryder remained silent for a beat. He simply gazed at the small boy, Evan. His name would eventually be revealed, and recognized something in his expression he hadn't witnessed in years. Vulnerability, the variety that wounds profoundly. At his back, the other riders traded uncertain looks. They were men who'd witnessed many things, crashes, brawls, grief, but the vision of a weeping child on a peaceful street always struck differently. Ryder stood gradually, his boots meeting the heated asphalt, and rested one massive hand on the boy's shoulder. "Start from the top," he said softly. Evan recounted through shaking words that his sister, Mara, merely 12, had been abducted. A shadowy van, 2 men. It occurred near the park on the opposite side of town just 60 minutes earlier. His mother was at her job, and he'd been playing with her. He chased after them until he couldn't draw breath, calling her name. Nobody intervened. Nobody offered aid. The authorities hadn't shown up yet. He'd come sprinting down the street until he spotted the row of motorcycles gleaming like an armed force prepared for battle. He didn't even recognize who these men were. He simply prayed someone would hear him, someone would give a damn. By the time he concluded speaking, Ryder's jaw was rigid like granite. His brothers didn't require instructions. They recognized it in his gaze. Iron met conviction. Ryder pivoted toward his men, his voice hushed and terse. "We ride." That was his only statement. And that was sufficient. Within moments, the tranquility exploded. The men mobilized like a single organism, leather groaning, engines thundering to existence. The atmosphere filled with the roar of motorcycles as Ryder hoisted the boy onto the rear of his own machine, securing him properly. Evan's tiny hands gripped the man's vest, his pulse racing not from terror, but from faith. They departed in arrangement, the noise reverberating down the orderly residential streets as drapes parted in astonishment. Mothers halted, gardeners glanced upward, and somewhere someone murmured that the angels were soaring once more. They traveled for nearly 20 minutes, threading through traffic with a sharpness that only brotherhood could generate. Ryder's contact in the vicinity, a man named Vince, had surveillance everywhere. Within moments, Vince phoned with intelligence. A black van had been spotted racing past a neighborhood gas station on Route 9, advancing toward the abandoned industrial complexes by the waterfront. It was a location the bikers understood intimately. Too many corrupt things had transpired there. When they reached their destination, the sound of the engines ceased like the conclusion of a percussion roll. The stillness that followed was oppressive. The van rested near the cargo bay, its rear doors partially opened. Ryder could detect faint sounds, a girl's stifled sob. Without pause, he gestured to his men. They dispersed quietly, years of intuition operating faster than cognition. One man advanced to the rear, another secured the flanks. Ryder approached the van directly, eyes severe, every tattoo appearing to animate under the brilliant daylight. The first man who emerged from behind the van stopped cold when he spotted them. He wasn't accustomed to being prey. Within moments, the bikers had him restrained. Ryder wrenched open the rear door and discovered Mara terrified, wrists bound, eyes wide with shock. He didn't utter a word, just extended his hand and released her gently, his actions deliberate, almost paternal. "You're safe now," he whispered, his voice dissolving the strain. Evan rushed toward her the instant she was liberated, throwing his arms around her as if he'd never release her again. For an extended moment, none of the bikers uttered a sound. They simply remained there observing the two children embrace each other, understanding that for all their hardened facades, this was their purpose. Not for dominance, not for defiance, but for instances like this. The police materialized minutes afterward, attracted by the disturbance. The bikers didn't protest, didn't brag. They merely acknowledged and retreated, allowing the officers to manage the consequences. As they positioned themselves by their motorcycles, Ryder studied his brothers. They were all silent, the variety of silence that arrives when excitement recedes and meaning takes hold. "No one should ever feel isolated in this world," he stated eventually. "Not a child. Not ever." As they traveled back through the bright, pristine streets, Evan waved from the sidewalk, positioned beside his sister and mother, who had just appeared in tears. She formed the words, "Thank you," repeatedly, but the thunder of the engines swallowed her voice. It was irrelevant. They'd received it in their souls. Hours afterward, as the sun descended low, the bikes were stationed again in a flawless line outside Ryder's residence. The men sat in the shadow, silent but satisfied. There was no festivity, just tranquility. Ryder reclined on his seat, eyes shut, replaying that small voice in his consciousness. "They took my sister." He grinned faintly, the variety of smile that belongs to a man who understands he's accomplished something righteous. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that compassion can emerge from the most unlikely hearts, please like, share, and subscribe to Untold Stories 0.4. These moments carry weight. They demonstrate that even in a world saturated with chaos, humanity still communicates quietly and responds courageously. Before the ending, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Ryder's place? Would you have ridden out, too? That day, the Hells Angels didn't wait for anyone to instruct them what was proper. They didn't wait for publicity or recognition. They simply rode, not for fame, but for a small boy's plea that reminded them who they authentically were. And as the engines dissolved into the distance, the world was reminded of something profound. Kindness doesn't always adorn a halo. Sometimes it wears leather.